Hi, I'm James Catherall. I'm a co-founder of Catherall Audio, and we have a big video for you today. We're going to talk about how to integrate MainStage with your notation software, and we're going to cover what I believe is the 4 top notation software programs right now. That's going to be Sibelius, Dorico, Finale, and MuseScore. I'm going to go through each step in this video so that you can follow along and set it up on your own. I'm also going to attach a download link in the description that you can download, and it'll have a PDF so you can follow along with the written instructions as well. Make sure you stick around until the end, where I'm going to do a ranking of all 4 of the notation software programs. That way, if you're not sure which one you want to go with, this can let you know which one's going to connect with MainStage the easiest. I'm also at the end, I'm going to talk about how to record and make your own MP3s as well once you have all of this set up. So let's get started. The first thing we're going to open up is called Audio MIDI Setup. This is a native app that comes with macOS. We want to make sure we're looking at the MIDI Studio. So you can go up here to Window, make sure it says Show MIDI Studio, and it should look like this. And then we're going to double click and open up the IAC driver. The IAC driver, or bus, is basically like a virtual MIDI cable that you can use to connect 2 software programs together on your computer so they can communicate and send MIDI data to each other. The first thing I want to do is make sure the device is online by checking that box. And then I'm going to go to where it says ports. And this is going to show me all of my IAC buses. If this is your first time doing this, then this window will be empty, and you can click the plus button to add buses. The main rule of thumb with this is you want to make sure you have as many buses as you have keyboards in MainStage. So for each keyboard, make sure you add a bus. You can double click each of these names and change it to something different. I like to keep them numbered in sequential order because that makes it easier for me to remember. And that's it in Audio MIDI Setup. All right, now let's move on to MainStage and set some things up in there. So I'm going to start in layout mode. First thing is I want to change my keyboards with these MIDI ports. I'm going to click the drop-down menu, and I'm going to make sure it's set up on the bus that I want. That one's on bus 1, and this keyboard's going to be on bus 2. Next, we're going to be in edit mode, and we're going to be looking at the program numbers and program changes. So each patch in MainStage is given a program number by default, and MainStage will add them sequentially as you add new patches. So you just want to make sure that each patch has its own program number and none of them are duplicated. You can end up with a duplicate program number if you end up copying and pasting patches in your MainStage concert. You can check if you have any duplicates by clicking on a patch, and then down here in the Attributes tab, it says Program Change, and this is its program number. If I change this, now it's at 2, it'll tell me there's a duplicate, which means I already have a program 2. So I'll take that back to 1. I also like to show my program numbers in my patch list. You can do that up here at the gear, and then check this, Show Bank and Program Numbers. It just makes it a little bit more convenient for me when I'm in my notation software to remember which patches are which programs. One other thing with program changes, I'm going to go up to MainStage Preferences, and I'm going to go to MIDI. And in the MIDI preferences, it has this program change range. MainStage lets you change the program numbers for either 0 through 127 or 1 through 128. I like to keep it at 1 through 128 just because it makes it easier. So patch 1 is program 1 and patch 2 is program 2 and so on. If I do 0 through 127, that'll mean that patch 1 is program 0, patch 2 is program 1, which to me just gets a little bit more confusing. But if you want to change it, it's right here in this drop-down menu. You can select one or the other. Finally, I want to check out my concert settings. So I'm going to go up here and click up here to get to the concert settings. And we're going to look at 3 main areas. Right here it says send unassigned MIDI to all channel strips. I want that to be unchecked. And we'll talk a little bit more about what that means in the future, and I'll show you some examples later in this video. For program changes, it's usually set to device all, and I leave it like that, but that's just what device is going to accept and do the program changes. I typically leave it on all, and that works fine for me. And then send unused program changes to channel strips. I also leave that unchecked as well. All right, so that's everything we need to do in MainStage. Next, we're going to move on to our notation software. And we have 3 main goals we're trying to accomplish in our notation software. We want the software to output its MIDI information to the IAC bus. That way it can go to MainStage. We want to make sure we close any MIDI loops. And a MIDI loop is when the software is outputting to a bus and it's also getting input from that same IAC bus. So that means that you can create a loop which can end up freezing your software and crashing your computer. And then number 3 is we're going to set up program changes in the notation software so that it can change the patches in MainStage for you and you don't have to change them yourself. As I'm talking about the notation software, I'm going to do a split screen where the notation software is going to be on the left and then MainStage is going to be over on the right. So that way you can see how it works when the messages are being sent between the two programs. And finally, I'm going to be using an excerpt from a composition of mine called In Eternity's Grasp, and you can listen to that whole piece at catherallaudio.com. Okay, I'm going to start in Sibelius. So the first thing we're going to do is go up to the Play tab. And then over here on the left, it says Setup, and there's a button next to it. I'm going to click on that. And this is going to bring up the Playback Devices window. So the first thing you want to do, if you haven't been in this window before, is you need to make your own configuration. So you can click New, and then give it whatever title you want. So you can start setting up your own configuration. We have two windows in here. We have Available Devices and then Active Devices. So Available is what Sibelius can use. And then active is what you currently have set up for this configuration of playback devices. If you want to activate devices, all you need to do is double click these devices on the left side, and it will bring it over to your active devices. Next up, let's talk about manual sound sets. So a manual sound set lets you divide up one IAC bus into 16 channels. So this can work well if you're trying to output to something like Logic or a DAW, or you're trying to do multi-output type of things. This is where you'd set that up so you can divide up all of those channels of that IAC bus. This is also an optional step. If you're just doing Sibelius and MainStage together, you probably don't need to do this, but in case you need it, here's how you'd set it up. I'm going to select the bus I want. I'm going to go with bus 3. And then down here where it says Use Manual Sound Set, I'm going to check that box. And then here's the number of channels that we want to use. The maximum is 16, but you can change that to have less of them if you want less channels. And then under here, for each channel, I need to give it a program name, which the program name is not very important. You just need to make sure that each channel has its own program name, and then you're going to hit Apply. And then you're going to go to the next channel you want to use and give it a different program name, and then hit Apply. And then you just keep going through that process for each channel that you want to use. And then once you're done, you want to click the Save button, and then you can hit Close. So once you finish setting up your playback devices, I'm going to open up the mixer by pressing the M button. And this is the Sibelius mixer. So you want it to look like this. If it doesn't look like this, you want to go over to this button on the left side, and you're going to click it until it shows you these windows right here. And once you have these windows, you want to locate your synth staves. So I have mine down here. I have two different synth instruments, and they have 2 channel strips each because it's a grand staff. So for each of these, I'm going to click on this middle window, and this is where I'm going to select my IAC buses. So this synth, I want bus 1, and for this synth, I want both of these to be bus 2. And now it's set up and ready to go. All right, so that covers step number 1. Let's move on to step 2 and make sure we don't have any MIDI loops. So to make sure we're not going to have any MIDI loops, I'm going to go to Note Input and click on Input Devices. Once you do that, it's going to bring up this window. And the input devices is for if you have a MIDI controller and you want to be able to use that MIDI controller to input notes into Sibelius. The thing you need to be careful though is IAC buses can also end up being used as input devices, which we don't want. So I'm going to make sure all of those IAC buses are unchecked. And once I've done that, I'm going to hit OK. And that'll close up those MIDI loops. Now let's move on to step number 3, is setting up program changes inside of Sibelius. So I'm going to zoom in right up here on the score, and we can see this area right here. This is my program change. The tilde is a command in Sibelius to make sure that it hides that staff text, and it doesn't show it when I print the score onto paper. And then here I used a lowercase p. So the lowercase p is the way for Sibelius to do the 1 through 128 program changes. If you use an uppercase p, then it ends up switching to the 0 through 127. So you just want to make sure that you're using the correct p for the program changes that you have. And then this is the number of program change. Other thing is you can see this dashed line to this arrow. That's showing me exactly when the message is going to be sent. As soon as the playhead passes this arrow, it's going to send that message to MainStage to change programs. And then usually I also put this text right here, and this is for the performer to know when they should change patches. And I also put the title of the patch as well. Now I'm going to play through the entire score so you can see what it looks like when you're doing the playback in Sibelius. I'm only showing the 2 synth staves so you can make it easy to follow along with what's happening in the score, but you're also going to hear a whole rest of the score down beneath it. So that's what it looks like when you have it set up all correctly. You can see that the program changes happen automatically, and you can watch the notes being triggered in your MainStage concert. We're going to check out one last thing in the Sibelius file. So earlier I had talked about the concert settings in MainStage. This button right here, send unassigned MIDI to all channel strips. So this last sample of the score has a long tail to it. And once the playback stops, that tail is going to continue afterward. So let's see what happens if I check this button. And I'm just going to play this last measure again. So if you heard that, as soon as the playback stopped, it immediately cut off that sample at the end. So that's why I always make sure that that button is unchecked in my MainStage concerts. Next, we're going to move on to finale. And I'm going to start by talking about one major caveat that to me is a pretty big deal breaker for finale if I want to try and use MainStage at the same time. So finale will only let you either play back through audio units or through your MIDI output. So what that means, your audio units would be all of your virtual instruments. So that's like if you're using Contact or virtual drumline or Cinesamples or Spitfire samples or anything of that nature, those are your audio units. And then the MIDI out would be everything getting sent to MainStage. So to me, that's a big deal breaker that I can't have those at the same time, because that's the whole purpose of wanting to send out to that MIDI stuff. So if you want to hear everything at the same time, you can send it all through MIDI, but then you'd have to house all of your instruments inside of Logic. The other thing that's kind of a bummer about it is that Finale's response to this is basically deal with it. On their pages, they say to just record it separately and then combine them, which to me is not really a great answer, especially for a professional level software that has a price tag of $600. I feel like that's something that other softwares can do it, so why don't they have it included as well? Okay, so now that we've talked about that, let's work on setting it all up. I'm going to start by going up to this MIDI audio, and I want to make sure it says play finale through MIDI, and I want that one to be checked. Next, I'm going to go to device setup and MIDI/internal speaker setup. At the top of this window, it says playback 2. I want that to be MIDI system. And then my output devices, I want bus 1 and bus 2, because those are the buses I'm going to use. If you're using more, then you want to make sure you add more down here. And then I'm going to hit OK. So that covers step number 1. We now have finale communicating to that IAC bus so it can go to MainStage. Now let's work on step number 2. To close the MIDI loop, I'm going to go back to MIDI audio, device setup, and then where it says MIDI through. And I want to make sure that's set to off. And then I'm going to hit OK. So that closed our MIDI loop. Now let's work on setting up program changes in Finale. So I'm going to click on the expression tool in this tool window that's represented with the mezzo forte symbol. And then I'm going to go to the measure where I want that program change to be. So I'm going to go to measure 9, and I'm going to double click above the staff. And that's going to open up the expression selection window. I want to go to miscellaneous. And then if you already have your program changes created, then you can just click on them here and add them in. These are my program changes that I've created. If you don't have any yet, then we're going to go down here to where it says create miscellaneous expression. I'm going to click on that. And then this window, it says text right here. So this is going to be the representation in the score to show you where that expression signal is going to get sent. So for this one, I'm going to put P5. And then I'm also going to put a description. And then I'm going to go to the playback area, and then type, I want to set that to patch. And then under GM, I'm going to click this drop-down menu, and it's going to show numbers and names. You don't have to worry about the names. Those are just standard general MIDI names for all of these different programs, but that's not important. The important part is the number. So I set this up as P5, so I want to pick number 5. And now I'm going to hit OK. And there's our new program change. So for me, on this measure, I'm going to select this program change 3, and then I'm going to click assign. Let's zoom in so we can see that. Right here where it says P3, this is my new program change. You can also see this dashed line with this dot right here. So that's showing me exactly where that program change is going to happen. As soon as the playhead crosses that dot, it's going to send that message to MainStage to change programs. So that's the full setup in Finale. Now I'm going to play through the score. It's only showing the 2 synth staves. That way it's easy for you to follow along and seeing what's happening, but you're also going to hear a whole bunch of other instruments as well in the full piece.
Remembered?
So that's how it all works when you have everything set up between Finale and MainStage. Let's check out one thing inside of the score before we move on. At the beginning of the video, when I was talking about the MainStage settings, we looked at the concert settings and made sure that send unassigned MIDI to all channel strips was unchecked. So there was this ending sample in the score that when you played it, it had a long tail that continued even after the finale playback stopped. So let's see what happens to it if I check this box and then I play that last measure. So you hear as soon as the playback stopped, it immediately cut off that sample. So that's why I always have that box checked in my MainStage concerts. All right, next up, we're going to be working inside of Dorico. I'm going to start in this Play tab. Over here on the right where it says MIDI instruments, this might be closed for you by default like this. You just have to click this arrow to open it up. And then this window will also probably be empty by default. You want to add in your instruments by pushing plus, and that'll add in a new window for you. Once it's there, you want to click on the drop-down menu and make sure it's set up to the correct bus that you want. I'm also going to make one change inside of MainStage. I'm going to go to Layout. And then for these keyboards, I'm going to keep this on bus 1, but I'm only going to send it to channel 1. For the second keyboard, I'm going to change this to bus 1 and send it to channel 2. And then go back to Edit. Now, once you have your MIDI instruments set up, you want to go over here in where it says Synth 1 and Synth 2. These are my synth staves, and I want to make sure these are set up to go to the correct IAC buses. So that one's there, and it's channel 1, and here's Synth 2 on bus 1, and it's going to channel 2. So that's ready to go. That covers step number 1. So now we have Dorico communicating with that IAC bus so it can go to MainStage. Let's work on step number 2 and make sure we don't have any MIDI loops. So I'm going to go to Dorico Preferences. And then I want to go to this Play tab on the side. And then right here where it says MIDI Input Devices, I'm going to click on that button. And this shows me all the input devices. And this can be used if I have a MIDI controller that I want to use to input notes into Dorico while I'm writing. The other thing I need to be careful with, though, is that IAC buses can also get used as MIDI inputs, and we don't want that to happen. So I want to make sure that all of my IAC buses are unchecked. And then I'm going to hit OK. And then hit Apply. And then close. So that covers step number 2. Let's move on to step number 3 and set up program changes. There are quite a few steps to this, so let's get started. I'm going to go to the Play tab and down to where it says Playback Techniques. And then I'm going to hit this plus button right here. I already have a few of these created, so I'm going to start with P5 to give it a name. This name isn't really important for the function of it. It's just important that you give it something that you're going to remember easily. And I'm going to hit OK. And then I'm going to go back to Play and Expression Maps. And I already have my expression map created right here. It says Program Changes, but you want to hit the plus button to create your expression map if you haven't already created one. And then you're going to give it a name up here where it says Expression Map Data. That's where you're going to give it the name that you want. Once we've done that, we're going to go down to Bass and add on switches. And in this window right here, I'm going to hit the plus button. And this is going to bring up all the playing techniques. And that's where I just created that P5. I'm going to select that and hit OK. And then right here where it says PC, that stands for program change. I'm going to click on that. Dorico is set up to be 0 through 127 on program changes. So just make sure you're keeping that in mind as you're thinking of them. Program 0 is patch number 1. So for P5, I'm going to set that up as program change 4. And then I'm going to hit OK. And once I've done that, I'm going to go over to Engrave and click on the Engrave window and go to Playing Techniques. And now I'm going to add a new one, and I'm going to call this P5. And then I'm going to go down to Text and click here. And it will probably autofill this for you with that P5. For popover text, I'm also just going to change that and make sure it's a capital P. And then I'm going to go to Playback Technique. And there's a lot of them in here, so you want to search and find yours. So here's that P5. And then I'm going to click OK. Last part of this, I'm going to go back to the Play tab, and I'm going to go over here in MIDI Instruments. I'm going to click on this gear. And this window is going to pop up. And for my Synth 1, I'm going to make sure the expression map is set to program changes. So here are all the different expression mappings, and I want to make sure I'm on program changes, and I'm going to hit OK. All right, so those were all the steps to create your program changes. Now we can work on putting them in our score so they can get sent to MainStage while we're doing our playback. Okay, so I'm gonna go up to the right tab, and then I wanna add a program change right here. So I'm gonna click on this rest. I'm gonna click Shift P, and then that's gonna be able to add in my playback techniques, and I'm gonna push P3, and I'm gonna click right here, and that's my program change. I'm gonna zoom in so we can see that. This dotted line is telling me exactly when that program change is going to get sent to MainStage. As soon as the playhead crosses there, then it's going to send that program change over to MainStage to change patches. So now I'm going to play through the score so you can see how it all works together. It's only going to show the synth staves so you can easily follow along with everything that's happening, but you'll hear the rest of the instruments in there with it as well.
Remembered?
So if you have everything set up correctly, then that's what it'll look like. You'll see the program changes happen automatically and all the notes get triggered inside of MainStage so you can hear everything together. Let's check out one more thing before we move on. So talked earlier in the video about the concert settings in MainStage. Right here, we had send unassigned MIDI to all channel strips, and we left that unchecked. And this last sample in the score had a long tail to it that continued even after the playback stopped. So let's see what happens if I check this box. And then I'm going to play just that last part. So you heard as soon as the playback stopped, it immediately cut off the end of that sample, even though it still had the rest of that tail. So that's why I always make sure that that box is unchecked in my MainStage concerts. All right, and we're gonna end off with MuseScore. This will be our last one. And I think this is a great option because it's completely free, whereas the rest of these softwares that we've talked about are all upwards of hundreds of dollars. The other cool part is it comes with its own drumline sounds, so if you're writing a lot of drumline stuff like this, it has it included, so you don't have to spend the extra money for virtual drumline either if you're just starting out. So I think the only difficult part of MuseScore was getting the program changes to happen. You can't create your own MIDI messages to be able to send program changes to MainStage inside of MuseScore. What you have to do is create your own XML file, write code that creates your own instruments that have those MIDI actions inside of them. And I'll show you that in a little bit. But if you want to just download that XML file, I'll leave a link in the description down below. That way you can just download that link below and you don't have to worry about creating your own. You could just use that one if you want to use MuseScore and MainStage at the same time. So let's take a look at what that looks like if you're going to create your own. So here's that XML file that we had to code, has all of this stuff inside of it, and these are what are sending the program changes to the instruments. And if you're going to download this, I'll show you how to import it into MuseScore as we go through the different steps. So now let's work on going through all of our 3 steps inside of MuseScore. First, I'm going to go to the MuseScore preferences and over here to I/O. And this is where I can set up my MIDI output to the IAC bus that I want. So MuseScore only lets you output to one bus. So I'm also going to have to change my MainStage setup in just a little bit as well. You also have to choose a MIDI input. So I typically set it to my MIDI controller, but you just want to make sure that it's different than your MIDI output. And then you click apply, and then you click OK. So that sets up steps number 1 and number 2. We have that MIDI loop closed and we have that communication going to the IAC bus so it can go to MainStage. Let's make those small tweaks in MainStage and then we'll move on to the program changes. So for this top synth, I'm going to leave it on bus 1 and I'm going to change it to only channel 1. And then I'm going to go to my second synth, change it to bus 1 and only channel 2. That way it'll still work with MuseScore over this one IAC bus. Now let's work on the program changes. Here's how you can import the XML if you downloaded it to use. I'm going to go to MuseScore Preferences, and then I'm going to go to the Score tab. And it has these instrument lists. So by default, it has its own MuseScore instrument list that it created, and it gives you a space for a second one if you're going to create your own instruments. So you'd click this folder icon on the side and then navigate to the XML file, and then that's where you can import it into MuseScore. And then hit apply and hit OK. Once you've done that, I'm going to push the I button to bring up the instrument window. And I want to make sure we're set to all instruments. And then you should see down here where it says MainStage Synth. That is the instrument that I created, and you want to use these to add into your score for your synth staves. And then hit OK. Now, once you've done all that, let's work on getting those program changes into our score. So I'm going to click right here, this rest at measure 9, and then I'm going to push Command T to put in staff text. I'm going to push P3, and then I'm going to right click it and click staff text properties, and then go to MIDI action. So if you didn't have that XML file, this bottom window would be entirely empty. And I know I've heard that there's a big MuseScore update coming, a MuseScore 4. So I'm kind of crossing my fingers on that one, that they let you create your own MIDI actions inside of MuseScore instead of having to create your own XML file and code it and do all of that stuff and then import it. It's important because even if you're not trying to send program changes, even if you're trying to send like modulation messages or other CC messages, you can't do that without creating these special MIDI actions first. So let's just cross our fingers on that one and hope that they're working on something like that. So for this one, I'm going to select change to patch 3 and then hit OK. And now as soon as the playhead crosses that P3, it's going to send that message to MainStage to make sure that it changes patches. So now I'm going to play through the whole score so you can see how it works when you have MuseScore and MainStage set up side by side. This score is also going to sound a little bit different than the ones for the previous notation softwares and different than the website because I'm using only the built-in MuseScore sounds with MainStage, so you can hear what this sounds like with all of the free sounds. The only problem I ran into with the built-in MuseScore sounds is there were a lot of clicks and pops. Did some research and I couldn't really figure out exactly how to get those to stop. So that's not coming from MainStage, that's just the built-in percussion sounds in MuseScore.
Remembered?
So that's how it'll work if you have everything set up correctly with MuseScore and MainStage. Let's check out one more thing in MuseScore before we move on. So if you remember towards the beginning of the video, we talked about these concert settings in MainStage and leaving this send unassigned MIDI to all channel strips unchecked. And this last sample in the score had a long tail to it that continued even after the playback in MuseScore stopped. So let's see what happens if I check this box. And I'm going to play just these last few measures. So if we heard right when the playback stopped, it also abruptly ends that sample. So that's why I make sure that box is always unchecked in MainStage. And that's how you integrate MainStage with your notation software. Don't forget about that link down in the description that you can download the PDF that has all the steps written out, and you can use that to help you as well as watching the video and going through these steps side by side. Now let's talk about that ranking between all of these. So before we get to them, this is just in the scope of setting up MainStage with your notation software. This isn't really a commentary on the notation software itself. It's just how easy is it to get MainStage set up with the software and have them playing together. So with that, starting at number 4, I'm going to go with Finale. I think to me, it really was just a big deal breaker that I can't have my audio units and my virtual instruments playing at the same time as my MIDI output and all of my MainStage stuff. Especially for professional level software, I just felt like that's something that it should work just like all of the other softwares do. Number 3, I'm gonna go with Dorico. To me, Dorico, it worked pretty well. Only problem was setting up the program changes had a lot of steps to it, and it was really easy to forget a step or do something wrong, and it was difficult after that to then figure out exactly what you did wrong, and then to be able to go back and make sure the program changes were happening correctly. Number 2, I'm gonna go with MuseScore at number 2. To me, that one, it got a lot of bonus points because it is a completely free software. So you don't have to pay any money, just dive in and start using it. And it was really robust for a completely free software. And they've been doing a lot of work lately to really build it up and make it something really great. So I'm really excited about the future of MuseScore. And at number 1, I'm going to go with Sibelius. To me, that's really the gold standard of being able to integrate MainStage and Sibelius at the same time and to be able to hear them together. It's really easy, there's not a lot of steps, and it all just works. And that is our video. If you liked it, give it a thumbs up. Make sure you hit the subscribe button. If you have a MainStage topic you'd like to see us cover in a future video, make sure you leave a comment down below, and we'll see you in the next one.